craving.
Yeah.
And I think, just to remind anyone who's watching this, that we are talking about healing and medicine. We're in a time when we're integrating many different styles of healing, whether it's shamanistic
5,000
and
plus years.
Ayurvedic out of India, Chinese, we're talking traditional European, we're talking modern medicines, we're talking New Age concepts of like attracts like and homeopathy, and all of these things are merging right now where there's this like major thing happening.
Well,
here.
it's because it seems at this point, interestingly enough, the micro age has sort of connected us, at least on the surface. Superficially, it's connected us in a way that all the data is now kind of pouring in from every direction, and like you said, there's 5,000-year-old information, and there's 2,000-year-old information, and there's 500-year-old information, and wherever these different traditions that are still in one fragment or maybe in some more complete ways present, they're all coming together, and to really
2-minute old information.
2 minute, exactly. That kind of pouring, kind of like just uncontrolled dikes breaking in, pouring in, is kind of inundating everything, and there's a general state of confusion at the moment.
Absolutely.
Because of that.
Well, and that's why it's up to us.
But there's also this crying need to know what to do and how to do it. Yeah. And every barker is on the street corner with his, hat and cane saying, this way, this way. But the thing is that I think it's got to be every way that is addressed. And the every way has never been addressed for everyone. And everyone, it's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a multitude of paths, like you said, with the lotus. I mean, there is a multitude of paths, but ultimately recognizing...
It's one lotus.
There's one underneath that that's happening. I mean, I think there are certainly incredible offerings like Anapanasati, for example, just watching the breath and letting the intelligence of nature unfold and guide, So I think that the possibilities of using the ancient technologies of consciousness, of plants, of chant, of all of these different things in our age are endless. And for each of us as individuals, there's options on how we want to do it. I think people aren't comfortable anymore with the dogma and anyone showing up saying, this is the path.
Right.
This is, plants are the path. 80% of the shamanic world use just sonic driving, drums, incense.
Right.
Maybe have but our relationship is always skewed by the judgments of our time. There was a period in Persia where it was punishable by death to smoke tobacco.
Wait, we're gonna change bodies now. Shiva's turning into Shakti.
Okay.
Go ahead, continue.
Yeah.
I will listen.
Oh, okay. Well, we're just talking about the multitude of possible paths. I know I meet people in the Hollywood Center all the time that are, they're on this path, and I can hear this wonderful truth coming out, this Sufi path, and then I can meet people who are on this divine soul sort of path, and I can meet people who are on the Buddhist path, and the Hindu, and the Christian, and shamanic, and the Wiccan, and it's amazing.
It feels like one big family.
It is. Yeah. We're all ultimately, I think no matter what, we can come face to face with our sort of human hang-ups, of getting arrogant or getting, our path is the best path, it's better than all those.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But
my way is the way.
My way is the way. And,
well, yeah, I went through that in about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's when we, it's like they say, the ones who have just quit smoking cigarettes are usually the most staunch anti-tobacco. The recently converted. So anyhow, yes.
Yeah, the recently converted.
But I am finding, like you, that as the years pass, I'm just seeing more and more similarity than difference. And that's what I see as what's changing.
Yeah.
Is this recognition of how we are connected to the same.
It's embracing the diversity, eh? But I think something has to be given up there, and that's the need for control and power structure. And that's something like in the past, obviously, was like, well, we want to have a monopoly of faith, or we want to have a monopoly of power structure. And I think, unfortunately, various spiritual paths have ended up, creating a lot of, people have a lot of aversion to them now because they see what that led into, Yes,
but I also see a sense of personal responsibility, that perhaps some people didn't listen to themselves, that even if we find a wonderful path, there's a tendency for us to go into this savior mentality and say, oh, I'm just going to give everything over to this, and this in the idea of surrender. So it's all about discernment and balance.
I think you just said a huge word. I mean, earlier the word responsibility was used, which I think is big and important. And I think discernment is absolutely, huge. I think a lot of people wanting to live out their savior archetype and complex have actually had to find people to save, whether or not those people themselves felt they needed to be saved. Those people were already in their own way saved or found or had their own cosmology and spirituality, but those...
The presumption.
In order to live out the ego's dramas of saving.
The spiritual path is very much, there's an individual responsibility, and that's something that's learned over time.
Yeah.
But to quickly say that the path is wrong,
exactly,
the teaching is wrong.
Yeah.
It's because I've looked, some teachings and teachers are more controversial, but I've spoken to with devotees that are having a most sacred experience. So I think, there's just a lot of things to consider.
For some cheese is good, and for some bread is good, and for some yogurt is good, It depends on what you need specifically.
Yes, and if one particular venue didn't work for one, we have to have the maturity to realize that doesn't mean it's something wrong with the venue. It's just realizing this isn't where I belong. I mean, we all belong somewhere, and we may try several times before we find where we really belong.
And I like what you were saying too, about equanimity. Within that, I think, we need a discernment, but yet there's a human element to everything here. And I think sometimes people, I know they certainly do it with the shamanic healers, where they don't want the human part. They want this construct in their mind of a saint, and they don't want the human part. They don't want to hear that
you've said that before.
He's
in the
divorced
shamans,
and he's got a couple of kids,
or
you don't want to hear that this this spiritual teacher has a secret lover, or you don't want to hear it's and as you were talking about that, I was thinking all these paths have a nectar, and all of them maybe
narcotic, sometimes.
Yeah, maybe some of them have that undesired substance. It's like, I was imagining someone trying to find a tree to be with, let's say, just as a spiritual analogy, trying to find a tree that they could be with that represents the tree of life and all that's powerful and beautiful in the world, but they're trying to find one that's not casting a shadow anymore.
Or they're trying to find one where a beaver won't chew it down, and
it's invincible.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's one that will not degenerate. Yeah. But that's the whole point, is that nothing whatsoever whether it's a religious system or an idea about reality, is stable. I mean, we're supposedly living in the relative universe, right? And yet we're the ones who make the most absolutist presumptions about everything. Isn't that interesting?
This is pure, this is impure.
Exactly.
A century later, no, well, we're going to change that. This is pure,
5
this
minutes
is impure.
later,
5
oops.
minutes later, you know.
Well, there was a line I read in a book of Robert Thurman's several years ago, and the best Lama is 3 hills over.
Always.
Because he says it's, then you can just keep that sacred relationship going. But if they're right in your face and you see them walking around in their underwear or flatulent or whatever, it kind of takes the shine off, and it's to see the divine in the apparently, in what is it that judges what's good or bad? Is that truth, or is that just another trickster ego?
Right. I mean, okay, so this is God, but that's not God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, according to whom?
Right. Well, I travel. I don't know if I knew you guys when I traveled up to the Yukon to be with Lama Lodro, right? And it was funny because I was making this travel to the north. This man, he studied with this, Rinpoche, and I really, it was amazing getting there and having the cigarettes and coffee. The all that you're talking about was there. It shattered all my ideas about mystical purity and fluffy.
Why isn't he sitting on his lotus and levitating?
He's this bush guy sitting in this creaky chair, just blah blah blah. And I mean, like he is known as the Iron Man of meditation. I know he's touched on states like immense, fields of being. Yet at the same time, he has not denounced his humanness. And I remember saying to him, my wife was pregnant at the time, Nancy, and I said, I can't help it. I keep thinking about her, and I want to make sure, because there was no phone out there in the woods, right? It's like, this is driving me crazy. I can't check in on her, right? The fear was, because all I'm doing is sitting there meditating.
Right.
And these
your
thoughts
fears
kept
are coming
up, these fears.
Perfect.
And he was like sitting there, with smoking his coffee, and he said, well, of course, you're human. It wasn't like, get over it, it's an attachment. You're not supposed to be feeling that. It was more like, embrace it.
Notice this.
Accept it. It's not like it's not supposed to be there.
Well, it seems to me that you had this initial idea, and that kind of bubble got popped when you met him.
Yeah.
But of course, then you had 6 weeks with him.
Yeah.
So what changed? Like, what did you come to some new realizations about?
I think I've been getting increasingly less dualistic. That's mostly what it is. The same thing happened with the shaman from Peru, who I know does diets, like cleansing diets and all that kind of stuff. After the ayahuasca ceremony, he came up and he handed me a Coke. I mean, and he smiled. And I know that he was not without understanding that this is not seen as pure. Like, this is... The message was, can you make this pure?
Or can you just be pure that everything is pure?
Right. Which is tricky territory, right? Because we're talking about discernment, but we're also talking about turning poison into nectar, so-called poison into nectar, so that you, in the Bardos, that what I'm getting from the Tibetan Book of the Dead right now is that we're supposed to be, not supposed to, but the goal is so this negative, so-called negative thing is going to arise, and to see the Christ in it, to see the purity in it.
There are many stories. There are many stories. Well, in India, for example, where certain yogis have defied death. They've been fed poison, and it didn't touch them, or it poisoned the person that gave them the poison. And so... Interesting,
eh?
It is.
Or going to see their spiritual teacher giving up their kingdom, their castle, they're traveling all the way, was it Naropa or Milrepa, I can't remember, but and they show up there, and there's this dirty, haggard gardener who walks up and smacks them, right? Like a violent smack, right, Martha?
Yeah.
So, but I think it's just like, let's get to the point here. Like, let's shatter all those illusions now, so that we're not building these constructs of ego and grandeur.
I guess I was fortunate because I was about 18 or 19 when I had, I think, my most unified awakening, where summed it up in, it's all God. So for me, the God word works, but I know it doesn't for many, and that's fine. There's many other ways of saying it, but it's all God. Even the violence, the mayhem, the murder, it's still, God killing God. I could see that as an act of love, of divine love. And so, but this is totally beyond the idea of I love my father, I love my mother.
Right.
But that's the rest of my life is devoted to integrating that and making sense of it, because I don't live there, but that's the most profound being truth for myself.
Yeah, I kind of found that interesting when you said that it's helping you get less dualistic, or you're getting into a more non-dualistic way of approaching things. And it reminded me of something Robert Anton Wilson said in a talk I heard him do, where he was talking. He wanted to nominate Fred Mertz. Remember on the Lucy show?
Okay.
Lucy had a girlfriend, and and there's Ricky, and there's Fred. Yeah. And and all Fred could do was go, huh? What?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
And he says that's what a bodhisattva does all the time. It's like always in. This is reality, no matter what. It's like.
Yeah.
It's that almost shocked, awakening look on one's face. Because every time the women did something, all he could do was, that was his only line. Huh? What?
I think a lot of people are afraid that if they let down the guard against so-called evil or so-called poison or so-called whatever, that it's going to consume them and become them. But if I was to ask you by what you just said, Deborah, is hasn't that you see God in everything, whether it's the violence or it's this or it's that. It hasn't now. Like, I think it's important that people understand that that's a whole other vibratory place of being. That
yes, and
you're not a violent person as a result. Like, just because you allow that and you recognize God and you recognize the totality, it's like Ramana Maharshi when he got mugged in the temple, and they came up after, and all he said was, they smelled nice. They sure were clean thieves. They smelled nice.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
And it's like, but realizing that because we can see the good in the so-called bad doesn't mean that we're going to now become it. In fact, quite the opposite, I think.
Sometimes we can take that imbalance away.
Well, right.
Present.
Well,
totally. And by fighting evil, we can become it.
I think Richard Miller had that happen to him.
Well, resisting, yeah. Well, good and bad is still not truth.
Yeah.
It's still two forces, and it's the wuchi, the union, the one.
The void.
The light and the dark is still a separation.
Padmasambhava, the sort of tantric Buddha of Tibetan tradition, right? Interesting, as I've been studying the initiation or the sadhana of his, because I appreciate it has this in it. But one of the titles is Dispelling Hostile Forces. Dispelling, hostile forces. And he said, what you repeat is, I recognize good and evil, God and devil, are of the same source. Realizing, and that dispels hostile forces.
Well, of course, if there's a conflictedness, how does...
There's the war.
Yeah, how does
There's the war.
Yeah,
it's
God and devil.
Yeah.
Exactly, and those that feed off that conflict, constant conflict, are still, part of it. They're dependent on it. They're addicted to it. And the thing is how do we just release ourselves? by recognizing that there's a transcendence of that within us.
The war ends there.
Well,
Yeah. I mean, did you know, I was in this, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that this realization I had, I'm still, it's a work in process,
Right.
because of course what's come over the years is I have seen, when I have faced so-called evil and negativity, the transformational point for me is when I see it within my own self. That I see that what I'm seeing, oh, that is, insert label here. Actually, it's the three fingers pointing back. I'm seeing something in myself. And the moment I see it in myself and own it, that's the point where I can take back my power and do something about it. But there's nothing I've seen in the world that I haven't found within myself.
Well, of course. I mean, and of course, and also the books of the dead. Really, what one is encountering during the between live state, if you will, well, between this life and the next life.
Those other bardos.
Yeah, those other bardos is one's. Basically, one's experiencing the projections of one's own consciousness. Everything that comes to one is being projected out of oneself. And so, what's different about that now compared to when the body drops? Is it any different?
Well,
I mean, are we just contributing to? Yeah, well, it's okay. I can be a disembodied voice. I've had lots of screen time.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I'm no way an authority on that book, but I do appreciate the teaching that we have to learn to recognize what you just said, these projections of our own fears, these projections of our own ideas of evil and of darkness. Even if we are just the one big mind, right?
Exactly.
But recognizing these are our projections, and we need to learn to see the Buddha in them, the Christ in them, the teaching in them, the good in them, that at the core of those,
a high indifference in them
there is
that transcends good and evil.
A diamond. There is like a transcendent, and at the base of that there is just pure being.
I don't know if we need to learn to see them. If we remove the veils, it just
there it is.
It dawns.
Right.
It is. It is what is. It just is.
Yeah.
Right.
But you mean your ability to see it though as a projection?
Well, I mean, why do you think that death is considered to be one of the ultimate points of liberation for human beings? Because of that instant, all the programming, all the compulsions and attractions, that kind of thing, that the body and the mind of that body has basically blanketed the being with, is suddenly, the cat's out of the bag. The bag is removed, and there one is in one's raw, essential state. And if one is awake to it, then one doesn't black out, then it's possible to realize liberation and awakening right there. All lifetimes can be bypassed if one can just wake up at the moment of death, if you call it, as it's called.
Well, Mr. Chad has an appointment, I have just been told by his wife.
Oh,
waiting
okay.
for him at the shop.
What time is it?
Almost 1 o'clock.
It's been a long and interesting journey.
Actually, it is 1 o'clock. So.
Yeah, great.
Okay, well,
yeah, thank you.
At this point, we wish to thank you, Chad.
Okay.
Thanks. Was that okay?
Great. Awesome. Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
You enjoyed talking?
It was
you didn't
fun.
want to stop
Yeah.
here.
So, that's it.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks. If you're still there, thank you. She's gone already.
Can I get that?
Do you have a car? Or?
I'm surprised I can have an appointment at 1 o'clock.
Do you have a car?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.